Hello and welcome on behalf of the UK Asian Film Festival. It's truly wonderful to have Ginsberg's Karma as part of the 23rd edition of the UK Asian Film Festival 2021. We have with us Ram Devineni, the director of Ginsberg Karma, Bob Holman, poet, writer, and presenter of the film, and Deborah Baker, author of A Blue Hand, The Beats in India, a book that follows Ginsberg and his companions across the ashrams of the Himalayan foothills to Delhi opium dens and the burning pyres of Benares. So to start, Ram, can you tell us what brought you to this story? What inspired you to make this film?
Well, I was a huge fan of the Beats and especially Ginsberg. And um, I had a poetry magazine for a long time. And this was about 10 years ago when Deborah's book came out, roughly around that time. And me and Bob were going to go to Calcutta for the book fair, which unfortunately got canceled while we were there. But we thought, why not make a film about Ginsberg's life in India and in particular in Calcutta? So we just traveled around and started setting up interviews with many of the people that were featured in Deborah's book. And we ended up this process of making this film. And that's kind of where it started.
The film is such an innovative blend of storytelling, form, and style. The animation in particular is striking. Can you talk us through your motivation for this archive meets talking heads meets animation aesthetic approach?
Well, I wanted to capture the creative process, especially the subconsciousness that Alan went through before he went to India, when he was experiencing this vision of William Blake and the process of creativity that sort of transpired from that. And I think the trip to India, you had to be psychedelic. You had to go into some levels that neither Bob or I could ever capture in straight interviews. And I think those animations really worked, which was done by a local artist in Kolkata. His name is Harsho. And I mean, we just basically the text was there. We just had to envision the visuals and bring them out. And of course, there was tons of archival photos, not so much video, but tons of archival photos of his trip to India that either he took or Gary Schneider or some of his friends took. And that was all available for us to make it come together.
On that note, how did you go about sourcing this rich repository of archive material?
Well, many of it was through the Ginsberg's estate, which had basically a massive collection of all the work. In fact, all of his photos. So there was, and they're one of the supporters of this project. So that was the wellspring of it. And then more importantly, Deborah's book, I mean, basically laid out the whole journey. And from there, I was able to sort of use that as a source to pick out what elements would work for the film. And then, of course, Ginsberg wrote the Indian journals, and there was multiple other versions from Joanne Kiger, Gary Schneider also wrote about this trip. So you could clearly sense that this trip was instrumental not only in Ginsberg's life, but all the other people that were involved, including the Indian poets. I mean, a lot of them write extensively about their experience with Ginsberg, and that being the inspiration for their style of work as well.
Right. Bob, can I just turn to you and ask, poetry is at the beating heart of this film, and Ginsberg's howl reverberates down the ages, and the opening lines in particular, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. They're still so evocative.
Very good, Ash. Good quoting.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's one of my favorite poems. What was the most memorable experience for you as a poet in relation to cinematically and physically tracing Ginsberg's footsteps in India?
To me, film is nothing but another means of getting the poem out to the people, and Alan used every method he had at his disposal to do that. That's one reason why we have the photos. He was a great photographer as well as a poet. And I got to say right now that if Alan were sitting here, let's say that he is, he would be talking about what's going on in India right now, you know. And so we try to get into the consciousness of, what he was doing in India, is to talk about how COVID is at this moment racing through India in a global tragedy, and how Modi has been feeding lies to the people in the same way that the former president of the United States would be feeding lies to the people if he were allowed to speak through Twitter and the other ways. You see, Devineni uses all of these digital techniques. There's even deep fake in our Ginsberg film. You know, now come on. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, which is why why I love this film. Besides the fact that I get to be in it, is that you know, Ram uses every means at his disposal as a creative talent in the way that Alan did. He was in India for this reason. He was sitting around in the coffee house with Sunil and the hungry poets because he needed to get to the truth of the matter. What is, I speak of a poetic consciousness. What is that? And it's Ginsberg's karma that's with us today. So that's the end of poem.
Speaking about deep fakes, if memory serves me right, I think Modi used holograms during his election campaign as well. What do you think Ginsberg would have made about the political situation in India? And, you know, we've been looking at some of these heartbreaking images coming out of India as a result of the pandemic on the ground. What do you think? This is a speculative question, but what would Ginsberg have made of all of this?
The same thing he would have made, Ash, about the situation in the United States. He would not have shut up. And we miss that. We miss that poetic presence, you know. I don't know how you do. I mean, as a poet here, and as a you know, like we just lost Lawrence Ferlinghetti. You know, so if you go through the poets who appear in the film, a bunch of them aren't with us anymore either. Sunil himself and the. You know, why is it that my mind immediately, Deborah, goes to Ashok Fakir, to the way that Ram Devineni tracked down this participant in Ginsberg's life, who was, as Sunil says in the film, a liar, but such a beautiful liar. And what is, you know, for us to be able to reveal him through the film is following not only Ginsberg's path in India, but Ginsberg's totality of devotion to truth and to the liberation spirit that unleashed the hippies on the world. I think that this is the first time that publicly anybody has gotten up and said, Ginsberg is America's first hippie, which means he's the first hippie. Now, I don't know what he'd say about that. I'd like to ask Deborah, what do you think Alan would say about us giving him that terminology? Not to step on your toes, Ash, but I just want to know what you think.
Absolutely fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I do believe that that's the case. I mean, he went to India as a beat poet. He went to India with a handkerchief in his pocket and perfectly groomed, and he returned from India, you know, looking like a sadhu, you know, with his jola bag and his you know, kameez and churidas, and brought that sensibility to America, which was huge because America had basically seen India as a kind of scary place, really poor, people died of horrible diseases. They didn't have the relationship to it, imaginative relationship to it that say England had. You know, some of Hindu philosophy had made its way through Thoreau and Martin Luther King, political nonviolent activity. But India came to America really through Allen. I mean, and it was Allen's connections that set up trade with India. So we had Indian bedspreads, we had Indian incense, we had Indian brass incense holders. So this fixture of my teenage life, which was the head shop, you know, was really courtesy of Allen Ginsberg, as well as this understanding of this kind of theatrical political performance, which we saw in Chicago in 1968, which we saw in Ginsberg's attempt to levitate the Pentagon. I mean, all of these means of political performance really were granted. I mean, everyone studies Martin Luther King's, you know, civil rights, nonviolent action, but Ginsberg brought a poet's expressiveness to political action, which is a little less, you know, it's more overlooked. And I think that was an important gift. And I think we're still trying to understand different ways that we can be active politically, but also, you know, inspirationally.
Thanks, Deborah. Just continuing in that vein, the Beat movement is considered to be quintessentially American, and the Bible of the Beat generation, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, seems tethered to this soul-searching odyssey across the American heartland. So on the festival program this year, we are also screening a film about the Beatles in India. So perhaps serendipitous connections there. Can you tell us a bit more about how your book delves into Ginsberg's journey of discovery in India? Did his experience kind of crystallize eventually into a blueprint for American counterculture?
Yes, very much so. I mean, you have the costume of American counterculture, you have the long hair, you have the beads, you have the barefoot or sandaled, you know, seeker after truth. And I think, you know, if you track Ginsberg's path around India, it's a perfect pilgrimage trail for Americans interested in pursuing Indian spirituality in all its forms, whether it's Tibetan Buddhism or Hinduism, or and all the, or someone like Ashok Fakir's version of kind of Muslim Hindu synthesis. So, I mean, he really, lays out the whole panoply of Krishna worship, which is a much more gentler kind of Hinduism than the one that we're seeing, in the streets today.
Don't forget the ganja, Deborah.
And the ganja and the, sitting with burning bodies at Nimtala Ghat in Calcutta, and at, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it properly, the Darashmeda Ghat in Benares. So, he did a lot of different practices, as he traveled around. He experimented a lot. He spent time with the Baal singers in rural Bengal. And I can't help but think too of the recent passing of Sally Grossman, who brought with Albert Grossman the Baals the Baals from India to America, which Ashok came with them. And and then having that encounter between Purna Dashbal and Bob Dylan in Woodstock. I mean, that was another iteration of Allen Ginsberg's influence in America, creating this tie between American troubadour poetry, music, and Bengal troubadour poetry and music.
I haven't seen the movie, Ash, but does the movie about the Beatles talk about Allen at all? Because it should.
Well, To be honest, it doesn't.
Oh,
Unfortunately, yeah. Yes, so I think there's scope for a third film talking about intersections. Yes, it is very Beatles focused. But Deborah, returning to you, absolutely. I think it is that vision of secularism, syncretism, and kind of tolerance that is under threat in India today, which is so richly kind of invoiced in the film through poetry. But can I ask you, what specific facets of your research and your book spilled over into the film? Was there anything particular that you wish to see highlighted in the film?
You're asking me?
Yes, Deborah, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I really like, which was this sort of image of his his own spoken image of the blue hand in the sky. And I mean, that's how he described his Blake vision after he returned from India. And I thought that was the description that he gave the Paris Review interviewer when he asked him about his vision, because by then he'd been talking about his vision ever since he had it, really, and he hadn't found the language to describe it until he came back from India and he saw all the multiplicitous ways in which God can be experienced. It doesn't have to be a monotheistic God. There would be Ganesh for someone like Peter Orlovsky, who was sort of greedy and kind of an addictive personality and just wanted his hands in every candy bowl around. And then there was Ginsberg, who was sort of always filled with longing for love that was always out of reach, which, is very much the gopi, maiden, longing after Krishna. So that's what I really loved about the film, is that it seemed to capture that kind of multiplicity of ways of experiencing the divine.
Thank you. I've got a question that either Ram or Bob can pick up, hopefully. Poetry, arts, and culture are coded into Kolkata's urban consciousness. So how do you think Ginsberg responded instantly to Kolkata's coffee house culture that is described in the film?
Go for it, Bob.
okay. Well, let's face it, the hungry poets were the beats of India, and they didn't know it until Alan came to town and told them about it. And Alan, not only, was, Tagore at the, at the base of his pull, his magnetic pull to Calcutta, but these poets themselves, who didn't know, they know who Alan was, but they sure didn't know that Alan knew who they were. And that sense of international appearing in a cup of coffee was Alan's forte, and that's where where the beats hung out. That's where the poetry readings happened when Kerouac and Ginsberg played with David Amram, and jazz and poetry got together in the early 50s in the U.S. So it was a mutual explosion, and for Alan and Peter to be picking up that lifestyle, living poverty in a way that it's just like, oh, here's what you guys are doing at its essence. I'm sorry, we're not going in that hotel room. It's got too many bed bugs, So what a treat, to reimagine that, and for the way that and I'll throw it back to you, Rami. The way that Ram integrates black and white footage of the 50s, the Harlem jazz scene, with the you should talk, we guess, about the music a bit here, but with the sitar sound, as we get into India, and the extraordinary illustrations that come to life in this film. That's, you're surfing the streams of consciousness to to reveal this history of joy. And believe me, folks, in this time, it's 2021, by the way, coming out of COVID, still the huge global tragedy of where our brilliant technology has got us. To have some joy and liberation, not so bad.
I'll just add two things to it. Which actually I was thinking very consciously when I was finishing editing it. Obviously, this took about 10 years to make, so the editing was really where the COVID pandemic really came into play. There was two things that were always in the back of my mind. One was the free liberation of travel. I mean, this was very, I mean, you can see that now that because of COVID, we aren't traveling. We aren't going to different places and cultures and experiencing that. And if you look at Alan, before Alan went to India, it was kind of like this Agatha Christie kind of traveling where everyone brought literally all their suitcases and everything and went to Cairo or India and basically sat there for like months, but really didn't experience the culture in any way. They were still very British. But Alan took it completely different. He went to India, he dressed like Indians, he became Indian, and he experienced the culture and suffered the ailments, the diseases, and everything else that everyone else would experience. That I think became the hallmark or the map for future travels to India and elsewhere in the world. Alan was one of the first to do that. And then secondly, if you look at India in particular, India is a really tough place to travel. If you're going on a vacation, it's better to go to Jamaica or go to Hawaii or whatever else. If you're going to go to India for a vacation or travel, you're going there because you're going, this is my observation, there's something transformative that happened in your life. And you're going to India to experience something beyond sitting on a beach and getting the sun. You're going there because you want to experience it. So a lot of people that have divorces and want to see some big changes in their life end up going to ashrams in India. People who have lost someone usually end up going to India. There's something very profound and moving that happens. Obviously, Alan was going through that too. He was at a point in his life, in his career, where he was looking for some big transition towards the future in his writing and everything else. And India was that. And I think after the pandemic, COVID, and when things stabilize in India, people will go to India because they have lost a lot of people in their lives, and they're going to look for these things that India can offer in the future.
Thanks, Ram, for striking that optimistic note. That actually leads me to a question about the theme for this year's UK Asian Film Festival, which is Ray of Hope, celebrating Satyajit Ray's birth centenary. Now, Ray was a famous son of Kolkata, and I was wondering whether you could comment on any potential connection between Ginsberg and Ray and Kolkata, however tangential. And this is an open question to it.
Actually, I think, Deborah, did you find any research about that when you were?
No, I didn't, surprisingly. I'm sure that there was a connection between Ray and the Krittabas poets that he got to know in the coffee house. But I know also that Ginsberg in 1947, attended, like a Ravi Shankar performance or Uday Shankar dance performance. So he was open to Bengali. He understood that Bengali culture was, global, even as early as the 40s. But Ray, I never, it's funny because it makes perfect sense because Ray was very much a street cinematographer and director, and he understood, Calcutta, both the city and rural Bengal, in a way that Ginsberg would appreciate. But I never heard him comment on Ray's films, or I don't remember. It's been a while now.
I'll tell you one ray of hope that happened when Ram and I were in India was that we went to the Satyajit Ray Film Institute there and discussed our film and Ray's films, and the students, I want to tell you, they were falling over each other to grasp this idea of the poem film. You know, what is that? What is a poem on film? How do you do that? They wanted to do it. They didn't know what it was. They were looking to us to define it. Ram was talking his mouth off, and it sounded very good to me. But really what I think it was, well, I got a question that day. One of the students said to me, have you ever been in a movie where you were writing a poem, being a poet, and that poem and the movie were coming together? And I said, that's what we're doing right now. You know, that's what Ginsberg's karma is. You know, we were, you know, what Ram has done with this multiplicity of media in there is to fragment reality and put it back together in an order that makes sense. And we are, I guess what he's doing is he's creating history. You know, the way Deborah did with a book, he's doing it with the film. And but the thing about it is that the techniques are such that it doesn't come out as a novel on film or as a history. It comes out as a poem in a film. And so in that way, I think it really is, for those students anyway, it was a ray of hope, you know.
Thanks very much, Bob. Again, this leads me to another open question. Do you see this film as a step towards reviving interest in Allen Ginsberg and his work, especially relevant to the turbulent world that we live in currently? And what do you hope this film will accomplish?
Well, I mean, I hope people watch it and really appreciate the impact Ginsberg had, especially in this sometimes forgotten part of his history. I mean, Allen, if you look at Allen in the 20th century, he really, especially the second half of the 20th century, he really tapped into every massive movement that was happening from the 50s and the Beats, going into the counterculture, bringing in Buddhism, helping to bring Buddhism to the US. He was very instrumental in not only his work, but his life in the later part of the 20th century. And I mean, I think that's very important. We don't really have that kind of figure nowadays. Maybe it's too early, but we don't have that figure nowadays. And going back to Ray and Ginsberg, one of the critical things for both of them were they were a result of the post-war and the creative explosion that happened after World War II. And this idea of internalizing and trying to understand these emotions and putting them into your art. And the big question now is, in the 21st century, is the issue of globalization and how writing is going to be affected by that. I mean, you can see that, of course, with the internet and social media and other things. But the two instrumental events of globalization is 9/11 and the use of planes, the instruments of free transportation to destroy, and now the pandemic, and how the world deals with it. What writing or what movement will happen as a result of globalization or in response to globalization? I think this is something all writers should start thinking about. And I'm sure Allen would have been on the forefront of really understanding it, because Allen was someone who was always, his ears were on the cusp of history. That's why he was able to make history, because he understood where it was going.
Thanks, Ram. What's been the response to the film so far, wherever you've screened it, be it in India, the US, or anywhere else?
Well, I'll let Bob, because Bob's been, we haven't released it. This is the actual world premiere. So we've been sharing it privately around, especially with the old beats, the ones who are still around, and people who knew Allen. So maybe Bob can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's the joy that comes through, like I mentioned earlier. You know, it's you know, like the politics, Ram is right. He was in every movie, you know, like gay liberation, you know, free, you know, the use of drugs, which now are finally being legalized. You know, the ability to live a life of poverty, you know, to feel what that is. Of course, he, you know, like right now with all of the divisiveness that's going on in the identity politics, you know, Alan would have to deal with being an old white guy like I do, you know, and there's something to be said for having new voices, for sure, and to finally be hearing all the voices of the chorus that Whitman heard. But it's also a time to acknowledge that we do have, you know, adventurers, poets, and provokers like provocateurs like Alan. And if you're a provocateur for meditation, I think you know, that's where, and that's also, you know, Alan helped found the Naropa Institute with Anne Waldman and Trungpa Rinpoche, and bringing, you know, so there's so many deep connections that this film only, you know, is at the surface of. But what a surface, as they say. And I just, I wish Alan were here to take it up, and I'm very glad that I met him when he was washing dishes at a party. As fast as we could drink, he was getting those glasses cleaned up so that we could have another round. That's the way I remember him, and that's what I hope the film does.
Thanks very much, Bob.
I really like what Ram said about, you know, kind of finding other means to tell stories, because, you know, Alan would have been, you know, would have had millions of followers on Twitter or Instagram, or he would have known how to use those media to further his message of love and tranquility, but also to poke and to tease and to embrace, you know, the people who would disagree with him. I always remember this one interview he did with a kind of Christian right-winger, moral majority type person. And at every turn where this person was going after him for his queerness or his political beliefs, Alan managed to turn it in a way that was teasing and loving and really beautiful and graceful. And, you know, and that was the sort of saint, like, you know, persona that I embraced in the book, and which I feel this film really captures in its kind of unexpected, quirky aspects, as well as, you know, in the voice of Alan that you hear throughout. It's and we do as writers, as poets, as filmmakers, you do have to find new ways of exploring the world and bringing the stories home.
Very much. I think that's a great way to bring this Q&A full circle. Allen Ginsberg is a man who lived by example, but also spoke truth to power. And on that note, speaking of Twitter, are there any Twitter handles or social media links you would like to share with the audience to promote the film?
Well, I definitely check out Allen Ginsberg's estate, not only Twitter, but Facebook and Instagram, because they have a lot of followers, and we're gonna really promote it on that. And Deborah has a Twitter handle, and Bob's got a Twitter handle. Everyone's got Twitter, so we're Twitter in the brain nowadays. So
yeah, and if you could find a Twitter handle that also involves a link for donations to India, that would be great.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Stay safe.
So, thanks very much, everyone, for your very insightful and perceptive thoughts on the film and wider themes and issues. Many thanks. The festival dates are 26th May to the 6th of June, and the full program can be accessed on the website www.ucaf.com. To follow us on social media, Twitter, it's at Come to UCAF, Instagram and Facebook at UK Asian Film Festival. So I hope you'll enjoy our list of films, and I hope you enjoyed watching Ginsberg's Karma. Thank you, panelists. Thanks again, and see you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Ash.
Thank you.